first presentation is Alzheimer's Disease Drug Discovery Center Data Sharing Platform, presented live by Rob Quick. So take it away, please, Rob.
I need to unmute myself, I guess. Can you hear me okay?
There, we can hear you just fine, yep.
Okay, great. And you're seeing my slide and not my notes, hopefully.
Correct.
So good afternoon. My name is Rob. I'm going to talk to you about the Alzheimer's Disease Drug Discovery Center and the open access data sharing portal that is part of that. But before I start, I hope I learned something from yesterday's plenary, and I want to give kind of a big overview statement about what I think the Alzheimer's Disease Drug Discovery Center and this OADS portion of it really means. So I provided a lot of effort in the last almost 20 years to various different academic research computing projects. Some of that work was with projects like LIGO or the Atlas and CMS detectors at CERN. And they've led to massively important discoveries and even some Nobel Prizes there. However, a few of the projects that I've worked on really have the potential for the immediate real-world impact, like the Gateway project that the Cyber Infrastructure Integration Research Center is working on now with the IU School of Medicine for sharing drug discovery research for Alzheimer's disease. So getting into this. A note before we start about Alzheimer's disease, if this is something people are already familiar with, please bear with me. But I thought I should say something about the disease. And I saw there were about 20 people in the room. Statistics say that about 1 in 10 adults over 65 will have some form of Alzheimer's and dementia, about 1 in 3 adults over 85. So if there's 20 people in the room, that means 2 of them will likely suffer from Alzheimer's by 65, and then 6 or 7 of the 20 people in the room by the time they reach 85. So now there's some, I think assume this is an educated group, and there is some decrease in risk with levels of education for various reasons. However, the AD, and I'll say AD for Alzheimer's disease quite a bit, but the Alzheimer's disease landscape is complicated, and there are no known biomarkers for early detection, and there's also a high failure rate in drug discovery programs that have been attempted so far. In fact, just down the road, some of my neighbors work for Lilly, and the drug discovery program for AD has been discontinued there. Or at least the portion that my neighbors have worked for. So, and as everyone can picture, if they haven't known someone with Alzheimer's disease, it's really a heartbreaking disease. It destroys memory skills, it destroys thinking skills, and eventually the ability to carry out daily activities. So let me talk about 83C. My goal in submitting this paper was really to put this project together in my own head, more than it was to share it with a larger audience. But one way to put a project together in your own head is to prepare to talk about it with a larger audience. So let's talk about the primary goals of the project overall. It's a 5-year project funded by the National Initiative on Health, or NIH, and the award number is on the first slide if anybody's interested in that. We're starting year number 2 of 5 years. And the goals are to identify promising AD drugs and create a portfolio of targets for further research, to allow medicinal chemists and structural biologists and other researchers to research the property of these drugs and validate the targets, in the end providing something we call a target enablement package that can move on for additional testing to preclinical or clinical phases. Third, to identify molecules that have a pharmacological or biological activity likely to be therapeutically useful. These are called lead molecules. And then to share the findings openly. And really that last step is where the CIRC at Indiana University comes into play. So sharing this data openly, along with facilitating access to computational research, is what we're trying to do here. And this is done in something, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, called the OADS, or the Open Access Data System. Most data, though not all of it, will come from open source repositories, things like Chembl or PubChem or the AD Knowledge Portal. And this will be analyzed by chemists, biologists, and other informatics researchers. Once that research is completed, it'll be pushed to these target enablement packages that I mentioned. And the ADS itself will then have both an interface for these target enablement packages to be pulled from, but it'll also push to other AD research portals. These things are the Treat AD portal, the AMP AD portal, and synapse.org. So it'll not only serve up the results, it will push them to other important databases for consumption there. And really, I'll go back to that picture. The CIRC is working here in the BCB area along with the Open Access Data System in developing that. And BCB is the Bioinformatics and Computational Biology core. There's stuff that is not necessarily done as the core research by the chemists and biologists and collaborative researchers that is outside the traditional drug design or drug discovery process. So the Bioinformatics and Computational Biology core has three main goals: designing and running the infrastructure for the AD3C project. And I should say cyber infrastructure there, not necessarily the other infrastructure. Looking for new methods for predicting and prioritizing these target drugs, and finally providing bioinformatics support and, as it turns out, other general IT support to the project. So the components as I saw them, and sitting back and just kind of thinking about what the main components were of the portal and the project as we were trying to develop them, are one, software that either a researcher contributed or is open source, needs to be brought into the portal. The data from both local and publicly hosted data sets, the computational resources for running analysis and services that we're running currently on Exceed, and then some IU resources, but also have our persistent services hosted on Jetstream. And then a UI for the BCB portal itself, which we're using the Apache Ariavada middleware stack, and a repository where interested researchers can pull the data outputs, and then a handful of public repositories we push the data outputs to. And so these are kind of the core structural or architectural components. Let's see. And so we got that down, and I got that pretty straight in my head, and I think we had some ideas as what to do, but wait, the group that was mostly made up of the medicinal chemists, but also the structural biology guys, came and said, well, there's this drug discovery environment called the CDD Vault that we would really like to use as our work area for doing common drug discovery type research. And this CDD Vault is a commercial project, a commercially provided cloud-hosted environment. And it really is a collaborative environment for the researchers to do those first steps of both pulling the open source data and doing some initial analysis. So we kind of had to take a step back here again, and it wasn't, this BCB portal wasn't as long as are covering all the researchers here. It was only covering a portion of them, but we still needed to get all the stuff from both the BCB portal and the vendor database into the OADS. And so we took a step back with these additional complexities and said, you know, if we're looking at a standard computational gateway, we're looking at a data sharing portal. Now we're talking about integrating external commercially hosted cloud services. Let's take a step back and really dig into a data management plan. And this is what a lot of the work in year one of the project went into, was really trying to say, you know, what is the data flow? Where does the data come from? What are the various steps, and where will it be housed at various steps along the process? And where will it in the end be delivered to? So we stepped back, did a data management plan, and this data management plan It provided a lot of things, but really what it provided was a picture of the data flow through the project. So we provided this data management plan. It defined all the things that data management plans define, their roles and responsibilities, onboarding, offboarding, the sponsor requirements, the sharing requirements, quality assurance, quality control, and then the physical, where would it be stored, how long would it be stored, how would that storage be organized, and also brought in the intellectual property rights lawyers, which, as everybody knows, once you get the institutional lawyers involved, it goes to another level of complexity. And while I like to think the motivation was really understanding the data, this was also necessary to purchase the externally hosted software, especially something that has potential for intellectual property to be involved. We really needed to understand this not only for the architecturing of future components, but also so we could feel safe that the data was flowing through these externally hosted cloud services in a way that was secure and would not be lost. So, and I think the DMP was critical not only for that purchase process, but also it's going to be critical as we design the open access data system. So I'll go to takeaways, and it looks like I'm right on time here, so that's pretty good. So the project became much more complex with the addition of commercial components. There was a lot of general IT support the group needed, not only gateway development. So we went in thinking this was a gateway development project. It turned out being let's help these Alzheimer's researchers, many of who were moving from commercial to academic environments for the first time, work through their IT issues. And so while some of this fit into the standard computational gateway, I'm pretty positive that we'll have to have extensions to what is a traditional gateway for the data sharing components, or the external data sharing components. And we're all early in the process, as I said, year 1 of 5, and I feel that complexity may continue to grow. In fact, there's a second commercial project that is not externally hosted, that is locally hosted. I've installed that on Jetstream, and we're running local services now along with the externally hosted services, and these all have to be integrated and talk to each other. I want to say, if there's one takeaway from this, start the DMP early in the process. It's critical to the design, especially if you're doing something like data sharing and integrating with external services. And possibly, okay, so I said I had one takeaway from this, the DMP, two takeaways from this. The drug discovery research, I think, is super critical to the future of Alzheimer's. And I think what we learn here can also be put towards drug discovery for other diseases. I know there are similar type portals for many other diseases that are doing drug discovery, and we hope that the lessons that we learn about Alzheimer's are transferable to other areas where drug discovery is important to the research that's being done. And I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Rob. Do want to encourage anyone, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat, or you can perhaps raise your hand. Rob, I'll start with, I don't know if you got a chance to see the plenary a few hours ago, but it was all about interoperability of gateways. And I mean, as you were going through your presentation, I was just amazed at the number of things that you were having to interoperate with in terms of, you know, not just different cyber infrastructure stuff. You mentioned Jetstream and on-prem stuff, but you said there's all these databases, there's all these different things. So I don't know if there's more that you want to talk about along that line. If you got to see it, maybe there's some insights you have from the plenary. Just want to kind of tee that up as a question.
Yeah, so interoperability is a great question, and interoperability, especially in the data realms, is something that's being tackled by many groups. In fact, I have a small NSF grant that looks at general data interoperability. It looks a little less at other interoperability through systems and such, but so I think that the data interoperability, especially in a data-heavy project like this, is going to be super important. How do people get not only the data, but all the associated metadata and the provenance information about what's happening and what they're pulling from this data portal? So I think that's a super important question, and I think that interoperability is going to be one of the major questions of the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. I see a question in chat that it's kind of an amusing question, but I think we know the answer to it. Did you DMP yourself, or did your funder require it?
So the funder and both NIH and NSF require a data management plan. The data management plan you submit with a proposal is usually not sufficient to really have for a data management plan, especially when you're moving data externally. So yes, there was a data management plan. Was it sufficient to understand and really operate moving through 5 years? It wasn't. And in fact, the DMP should be a living document and change as the project evolves. So it's hard to submit a DMP up front and say that that's encompassing of everything that you're going to do.
Okay, and we'll get one more quick question in. Will the project handle PII or HIPAA? Will be HIPAA compliant?
So no, there's nothing, the only restriction on the data, so it's not critically restricted data, so there's no personal information in there. There is intellectual property information, as I mentioned during the thing. So there was some restriction in that we can't move the target enablement package to be public until it is properly approved by the intellectual property and patent lawyers. So there's a restriction in the data, but not a restriction in that we're using probably 90% of what we'll be using is actually public data to begin with, right? So it's coming from places like Kemble and the PubMed and such. So there's nothing there that will identify people. So there's no need at this point to be HIPAA compliant. There is a need to be careful with the data because it does have legal ramifications in IP and patent areas.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rob. Obviously, please stay because we're going to have a general Q&A here at the end. But let's move on to our second presentation.